Welcome back to The Truth About America, 1776. Friends and neighbors, boys and girls, today we are going to look at probably the most pivotal issue facing us and the reason for the original War of Independence in the 1700s that our ancestors so valiantly fought. Today's little look at the truth about America is the public notice that Judge Anna has put out. She's the fiduciary for the We the People branch of the government that we call the Federation. And she has made a lot of progress on the money side of the equation, and we now have a true American Federation dollar and an asset bank in which to put it in. I'm going to put the link to the bank in the description below, as well as the link to this article, so you can look it over for yourself. And let's go through this a little bit and see what she's trying to say here. So I'm just going to read this. As we have returned from over the sea, where our treasonous employees deposited us by registering us as federal dual citizens, thus impersonating average Americans, and then arbitrarily declaring us to be enemies in an illegal mercenary conflict, all under the color of law and for the profit and advantage of third-party principles. We have taken stock of their actions as our purported trustees and custodians, brought them to trial, and found them severely lacking. They have been convicted of gross breach of trust in violation of their service contracts, the federal constitutions, and have been officially standing in criminal dereliction and evasion of their actual contractual obligations as service vendors since April of 2014. They and their minions have been assessed an initial estimated $279 trillion in gold as damages under our cured commercial liens, and billions of dollars in precious metals bonds have been returned to Global Family Bank, a prosperity institution that is serving as our Federation treasury. We declare that the actual Americans are the holders of the only survivorship interest in all the associated waived and constructive missing person estates named after us. We have employed our unincorporated Federation of States doing business as the United States of America since 1776, which is in receipt of the delegated powers returned to it by both the original Confederation and the Federal Republic to issue a new international currency for the Union States doing business as the United States and for the purposes of international trade worldwide. Our new international currency, the American Federation Dollar, AFD, defined as 1/10 of an ounce of 99.9% pure gold, trades at a rate of 1 AFD per 180 USD, or when converted for domestic use, 180 Federal Reserve Notes, or FRNs. As other currencies are currently being rigged by manipulation of currency supplies and availability, and as both gold and silver values are also being rigged, the exchange rates are both volatile and subject to change, but will be pegged against the prevailing markets and published rates worldwide on a daily basis. This is the first new asset-backed currency established by our country in over 150 years. Our silver, nickel, and copper coinage also remains in circulation, together with outstanding certificates and bonds backed by precious metals, land, and other assets. While our silver and gold reserves have been assiduously collected and transferred overseas for safekeeping in the Philippines and in the world's central banks by these same erring principals and contractors, we have been charged without our knowing or consent for their expenses carrying out innumerable foreign mercenary conflicts in our name and under our war flag. Naturally, we Americans have been blamed for all this warmongering, but our contracts with these vendors, both the Constitution of the United States of America and the Constitution of the United States of America, do not allow for any such extraterritorial activities, and it's clearly stipulated that our armed forces exist to defend the country and its people, not to wage war for profit on others. Those banks which have extended our credit to these foreign corporations for illicit and unauthorized purposes have cause to know better, and the members of the Bar Temple and its various courts have similarly had cause to know better, thus to engage in crimes of personage and barbarity under pretense of war, whereupon we have placed substantial liens upon them and upon our assets that have been unlawfully, illegally, and immorally cashiered as abandoned and otherwise compromised assets. Additional efforts are underway to secure cured bond receipts that were issued in the names of individual Americans as part of the issuance of foreign birth certificates and so-called Social Security cards, which are bonds which are issued every 10 years throughout the lifetimes of the victims, but are not returned as receipts to the individual accounts, as they legally should be, but are instead arbitrarily dispensed by unelected bureaucrats and regularly drained by elected officials who illegally and immorally added individual Social Security receipts to their own corporate general fund on the deliberately false presumption that the funds belong to absent municipal corporation franchisees. These repugnant legal schemes have not even met the basic requirement for legalization, which requires fair notice and unobstructed access to remedy and exemption, clearly advertised and provided. The perpetrators have attempted to justify their acts as exigencies of war, but when examined, it turns out that there is no actual war, only repeated illegal mercenary conflicts ever since the so-called American Civil War, in which we are not owed any dignity under the law of war. The activities of the territorial and municipal congressional bodies and the chief executives of these foreign corporations operating in the District of Columbia, and please note, now deceptively attempting to continue operations as the American Government Incorporated, need to be recognized for what they are and prevented from making any more false claims against us, our assets, and our credit. All banks, including the central banks and securities brokers, are under demand to account for our assets deposited with them by our erstwhile employees and to return our assets to our control without further obfuscation or excuse, pardon my word stumbling. There is also under demand by the presumed donors of all those trusts to yield back our purloined property assets to our control and shut down this ugly system immediately. Safekeeping receipts and other records for all physical assets belonging to America and to Americans impacted by this fraud scheme shall be forwarded to our fiduciary office in care of the Global Family Bank and, as appropriate, reissued in the name of the individual trust and the United States of America unincorporated. This includes all assets deposited by Severino Sta Romano for the Avila, sometimes De Avila, Family Trust, the V.K. Durham Trust, the St. Germain Trust, the Urban Trust, individual so-called Legacy Trust, and Historical Trust accounts, illicit deposits certificated by or through Seed and Company, the DTC, DTTC, and similar international clearinghouses having American origins, gold deposited in the Philippines by the U.S. Navy, gold deposited in the Philippines and elsewhere by hired professional precious metal depositors, and all securities, stocks, and bonds held in the names of individual Americans, named estates, and fictional public trusts. The principals and parties, including the Holy See, the City of Rome, the City of Westminster, the Lord Mayor of the Inner City of London, the Roman Curia, Committee of 300, Global Federal Reserve, British Crown Corporation, World Bank, the British Monarch, International Monetary Fund, and others who are responsible for purloining American assets in breach of trust and contract and for receiving these assets as deposits should be ashamed and help us as examples and held up as examples of what bad faith really means. We have established our new gold-backed currency and chartered and authorized the Global Family Bank to issue it, and also established our international treasury, not to be confused with the treasury run by the IMF for the USA Inc., or by the United States Department of the Treasury, or any other service or function of our erstwhile federal employees. We consider both the Federal Reserve and the IMF to be criminal organizations engaged in fraud and theft, money laundering, peonage and enslavement rackets, obstruction of trade and commerce, personage crimes and human trafficking, taxation and securities fraud. There is good and proper notice to the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, and other interested banks and government and international bodies that these issues exist, that our assets have been purloined, and that we have been misrepresented and exploited by white-collar criminals functioning as inland pirates for purposes of fraud and unjust enrichment. The chief aim of these same criminals, operating administratively as Serco and privately as the British Pilgrim Society, has been to annex not only the United States but all former Commonwealth countries, 17 illegally occupied countries in Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, Iraq, Libya, and diverse other countries and nations for the benefit of their own commercial operations and coercive political power. They have been using our assets, including our labor, as the basis for their worldwide commercial terrorism. And they couldn't do this without the support and cooperation of the banks which have colluded with them all along. These same banks have cause to know that the gold on deposit with them comes from private sources, and also have cause to be aware of the birth certificate fraud, the Philippines safekeeping fraud, and the securitization of living flesh fraud. Every single one of the parties addressed by this email and published notice have cause to know that the Federal Reserve note is tainted by peonage and securities fraud and is essentially worthless, and that the USD, aka the petrodollar, is tainted by enslavement and securities fraud and collusive monopoly practices in obstruction of both trade and commerce. This situation can only continue with the cooperation and liability of the banks, securities brokers, insurance providers, and legal firms, and they therefore accrue the full commercial liability, and their officers accrue the personal liability for these continued crimes against humanity. All those who are done with the British Romano case system, done with fraud and malice as a way to make a living, and done with perpetual war as a way to make profit, are invited to join us and put an end to this evil and these abundant crimes against the most innocent and vulnerable among us, our babies in their cradles. Notice to the principals is notice to the agents. Notice to the agents is notice to the principals. And then we have it issued by Anna Maria Reitzinger, fiduciary, the United States of America, and her address there in Big Lake, Alaska. Care of Box 520994, Big Lake, Alaska 99652. All right, folks, that's our little lesson for today. I know that was a little bit long, but if you need to go through this again to fully understand it, or 10 times again to fully understand it, please do, because really everybody in the world needs to understand this information. It affects us all. we are all multimillionaires if it wasn't for the people, these banks standing in the way, intercepting our abundance and running it through these currency schemes so that we end up with peanuts. And the little handful of people that aren't actually doing any work end up with the lion's share, which of course is sick and wrong and cannot continue. So it's time to join your state assembly, folks. Get on board, get your paperwork done if it's not already. Make sure that you're an American state national, that you can prove it to anybody who asks. And we need to move on from here and get our money situation squared away. And it's going to take a whole bunch of us. So giddy up, let's get on board. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.